Hello and welcome to another episode of Fully Charged. Now, for those of you who've never seen it before, Fully Charged is a weekly or sometimes twice weekly series about electric vehicles, renewable energy, the future of energy and transport. It encompasses a very wide array of topics. And this is just a quick news update coming to you unusually from the middle of Sydney in Australia, where I'm working at the moment. Before I start, I really want to say a big thank you to some amazing Patreon supporters who've been waiting much too long to get a shout out for their names, because at the end of a lot of the shows I call out the names of people who support Patreon for $10 or more per month, and they're a really special thing, and I've promised that I'd do that, and I've got just five people that I really want to thank before we get going. Benjamin Batchelor, Dan Friedrichsen, Joachim Nordlander, Mike Tor, and Red. Just Red, but brilliant. All of you, thank you very much. And Red just raised his Patreon subscription from $15 to $30. I mean, I don't want to stop you, Red, but that's too much. You shouldn't do that. But I'm incredibly grateful because it does make making this show possible. Let's start with some amazingly good news, okay? Chernobyl. Now, we've all heard of that. That was the nuclear power station that's in the Ukraine. It's not in Russia, as I've once said in a video, it's in the Ukraine. So there's quite a lot of land around Chernobyl that you can't live on, you can't grow food on, you can't do anything to. All that happens is people travel across it to get to where the old power station was, which is still incredibly dangerous, and they're currently building a sarcophagus to bury it for 100,000 years because there's really nothing they can do about it. They can't clean it up and sweep it away. It's too toxic, it's too dangerous. Incredibly brave people from all over the world are working on this massive project to finally contain Chernobyl. Now, it happened in 1986, so it's 31 years ago. So what can you possibly do with that land that's around it? Well, two companies from China, Golden Concord Holdings and the China National Machinery Corporation, plan to build a 1 gigawatt solar farm on the land around Chernobyl. So just to explain, I mean, 1 gigawatt of solar power is an enormous amount of panels, and the land is very, very cheap. I mean, would you want to buy it? I don't think I would. So it's really cheap land, it can't be used for anything else, and the really crucial point is there's an amazing grid connection there, because it used to be a nuclear power plant. But of course, they install this solar there, and then what happens if it goes wrong? Oh my God, there's a solar spill! Arg! Run for your lives! Not. And here's yet another good news story. Those clever Dutch folks, well, the ones that don't vote for the he's Nazi, basically, he's fascist, Geert Wilders. As long as they don't vote for him, they're fabulous, the Dutch people. The Dutch railway company have just announced that all their pure electric trains are now powered by wind. Isn't that amazing? I mean, not all the trains in Holland. I'm being very specific here because some trains, as I'm sure some lovely Dutch people will tell me, are diesel electric like we have in the UK. But the ones that are pure 100% electric are now powered by wind. Now, they had signed a deal with wind energy giant Eneco to have all their trains powered by wind by the end of 2018, end of next year. But they've done it now. They've done it nearly 2 years early, and they're really proud of it. Now, according to a National Railway spokesman, one wind turbine running for 1 hour can power a train to cover 120 miles. Well, that story makes me really happy, but the next story is not really as good. It makes me very unhappy. Cobalt. What is it good for? Actually, rather a lot. The name Cobalt actually comes from the ancient German Cobalt, which means goblin's ore. Isn't that cool? I mean, it sounds a bit Lord of the Ringsy, doesn't it? But actually, it's really important stuff. It's used in inks and paints and glass and ceramics and high-strength alloys, but we're most familiar with it when it's used as lithium cobalt oxide in lithium-ion batteries. If you're watching this on a phone or a laptop or a tablet, then you've got some right in front of you. And if, like me, you drive an electric car, then every time you get in your car, you're sitting on quite a lot of it underneath the seats. Now, cobalt is mostly derived as a byproduct of nickel and copper extraction, and it's available all over the world. There's plenty of it. We're not going to run out, but it's in Australia, it's in South America, it's in China, and of course, a lot of it is in Africa. But it's Africa that is a bit of a problem. Now, a huge amount of nickel and copper extraction happens in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and 95% plus 98% of all that extraction is done by large corporations in huge open cast mines that are overseen by corporate management infrastructure and public bodies. And I'm sure there's some fairly dodgy practices going on, but essentially it's a publicly viewable and verifiable process of extracting these products, refining them in huge refineries in Africa, and then shipping them generally to China, where they're manufactured into the batteries that you're using now. So that's all above board and known about and acknowledged. But what is the problem is the little side bit that's going on around the corner, around the back, just around the back of the shed on the left, down the little alley and around the back. In there's a bit of artisan mining going on. Now, when you go to an artisan coffee shop and bakery, it's all very lovely and sweet, but artisan mining is a little bit of a problem. Artisan mining is where people literally dig a hole, quite often in a house, so it can't be seen. They dig a great big pit down, and they go down and they dig out some of the raw materials that go into making copper, nickel, and in particular cobalt. And it's fairly toxic stuff, and there's no health and safety, no oversight, no nothing, and very often children are employed to work in these mines. Now, according to Amnesty International, up to 40,000 children work in hundreds and hundreds of artisan mines spread all over Katanga province in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And they take, the people who do this extraction then take like a sack full of rocks down to a Chinese dealer in the local town, and they sell it to them, which is, it's all dodgy and illegal. They're not meant to do it. It's not approved. And then some of that then ends up in the batteries that we use and complain about the cost of the phone. You know, I mean, if you want to look at unfairness in the world, I would think someone going on about the fact that their new phone isn't as good as they were hoping is at one end of a spectrum, and at the other end of that spectrum there's a 12-year-old who's going down a mine digging up rocks. If you think about it, don't think about it. Don't think about it, because you'll go mad if you do. Now, it's important to remember that most of this materials extraction, particularly in cobalt, is used in the production of different alloys, different metals. Very little of it is actually used in batteries, and often the materials that go into making batteries are used as an argument against things like electric cars. Never things like phones or laptops. There's an enormous amount of products that we all use that use far more of this material than electric cars. Electric cars use about 2% of extracted cobalt. So we really need to be concerned about this. We've got to make sure that we make as much fuss and we moan on in a whinging, annoying way about where does cobalt come from, who's extracting it, what are you doing with the mines. And it's particularly the big manufacturers like Samsung, like Apple, like LG Chem. They've got to know the source of these materials, and they've got to be really rigid about them, and we should make their lives a misery, and they should hate us for making such a fuss about where these materials come from. And just to put everything into context, if you're wondering about the impact of the global oil extraction industry, just Google the Niger Delta. Don't look at it too long, because you'll get really depressed. But if you want to see how brutal, how cruel, how incredibly short-sighted and vicious the oil industry has been in parts of Africa, check that out, because that is on another scale. Forget about artisan mining. Just go into an area, say we want to extract oil. Some of the locals say they don't want you to do it, so you shoot them. That's how you deal with it. So I want to end on something a little bit more positive and uplifting than artisan cobalt mining. I'm sure we're going to come back to this topic again on Fully Charged, where the materials come from that make the products that we want to use, that in the long term cause less damage, and in the long term those materials are used for longer than we use fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are extracted, cause enormous damage where they're extracted, they're refined, cause enormous damage where they're refined, and then they're used by the end user, us, and they cause enormous damage where they're used. All three of those steps are incredibly damaging, and after that, after you've used your diesel, you can't use it again. That's very important. After you've extracted the material for your batteries and had them made into a car, and you drive the car for 10 years, 150, 200,000 miles, and then they get used in a house as household battery storage, or in a factory as grid backup, and then at the end of that possibly 25 to 30 year life, all those materials can be broken down and used again. That's a very different story. My batteries are worn out, I'll use them again. Very different, and very worth remembering to argue that point, and also argue that renewable energy is clean and cheap. Anyway, so this is a good story. The last story is a good story, and it's about diesel. Yes, diesel. So the Union Bank of Switzerland, the UBS to you and me, a right bunch of greeny, tree-hugging, bleeding heart liberals, aren't they? We all know that. They're a bunch of hippie radicals. In a recent report that they put out, they cited that the perfect storm of cheaper electric cars and tighter emissions controls in thousands of cities around the world is the death knell for diesel. They predict that there will be no more diesel cars being sold within the next 10 years. It is the end of diesel, and I, for one, cheer that. I'm really pleased that it's the end of diesel. But cities, including Paris, Madrid, London, are going to ban diesel cars from their central areas completely, 100% ban. You cannot go in a diesel car. In the next couple of years, this is happening. So this has devastated diesel sales, and thank goodness for that. UBS predicts that very, very soon electric cars and plug-in hybrid cars will actually be cheaper to buy than diesel and hugely cheaper to run. And they predict a really sudden swing towards electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles. And if we can wave goodbye to diesel cars, it's specifically diesel cars that really gets my goat. It's such a stupid technology to put in a car. You can understand it in a massive truck. You could understand it in a bus, although there's now electric buses that are becoming much more popular. But in a car, oh, come on, please. So that made me very happy to see that story, and that's all I've got time for. I've droned on long enough. I'm now going to go for a lovely walk in the Sydney sunshine. I couldn't film the way where I wanted to, which was with the amazing backdrop of Sydney Harbour and the Sydney Opera House in the background. It's so windy today that you wouldn't hear a thing I said. All you'd hear on the microphone was... It's quite windy. So that's all. That's all I've got time for. Please have a look at the Patreon link below this video. Please subscribe to Fully Charged. That would be really good. I really hassle you to subscribe to Fully Charged. And of course, as always, if you have been, thank you for watching.